Today's story starts in the parish of Rotherfield in around about 1816. As we know, back then everything was in black and white. Colour hadn't been invented yet. The motor car had not been invented, but luckily horses had been. Horses were expensive to run, so most people just walked in the middle of the road. Not a lot different than today, really. Unlike today, East Sussex highways had a good method of filling in potholes, and this can clearly be seen in these old pictures. The horse would fill in the pothole with manure, and the cart behind it would just roll it flat. Problem solved. Crowborough didn't really exist as we know it today. It had no Morrisons, Waitrose or coffee shops. And the charity shops didn't open until way late. So, for all of you who have clicked on this video for the wrong reasons, just because it says Pratt's Bottom, let me bend over and show you the Pratt's Bottom.
But why is it called Pratt's Bottom, you ask? Please watch this video and we will fill you in with all the details. So hang on to your seat, sit down and enjoy. This video is based on the book called A Wilderness Journey by Richard Pratt. We have tried to use photos and pictures that are of the correct area where possible. Some images are AI generated or altered for visual effect and to enhance the story for your entertainment.
It was a cold and windy night. On the 8th of October, and this luck gave birth to a baby boy. According to Wikipedia, this year, 1816, is known as the year without a summer, because of severe climate and abnormalities, which I can't pronounce anyway. That caused the average global temperatures to decrease by 0.4 to 0.7 degrees Celsius. Summer temperatures in Europe were the coldest of any on record between 1766 and 2000, resulting in crop failures and major food shortages. See, you thought I made that up, but I checked on the internet. It was right here, in the area known as Maynard's Gate, on a small farm, this child was born. We're not exactly sure the exact spot. It could have been here, it could have been there, or it could have been over there. But anyway, the child was born in Maynard's Gate, Rotherfield, not Crowborough. Due to health and safety reasons, all site of the birth have not been filmed for the sake of this video. Let's have a quick look on Google Maps, see the exact position and see where we're actually standing. Luckily, being a very intelligent baby, he started to make his notes for his future book. And we can see what a beautiful area he was born into. Well, I've looked everywhere to try and find Maynard's Gate. And here I am standing by this rather elegant substation. It's about the nearest thing I can find at the moment. However, my mate Kevin, the cameraman, found this. So this, officially, is the Maynard Gate. But it's such a small sign, nobody knows it's here. But if you walk round the corner, you've got this one. And you've got that gate, which is massive. So therefore, I think we should rename this area Coppard's Gate. So from this day forth, it's officially known as Coppard's Gate. According to his book, the young Richard was christened. And he was christened in the nearest church. So let's go now to the nearest church.
Well, I'd expect to put on tray legs in a day.
Wrong church. That one hadn't been built yet. Well, here we are in Rotherfield, and we're now standing in what's known as Johnson's Pond. Well, the remains of Johnson's Pond. Back in the day, the water used to be quite high here, and it used to overflow across the road, because the road was a lot lower, and going down in past where that house is now. I know the pond no longer exists, because, I don't know, about 40 years ago, the pond was dug out, and this house was put there. I remember it because my dad built the house. Talking about Johnson's Pond and Rotherfield, this is the Rotherfield sign. It's quite a nice sign. As far as I can make out, it's a man of some sort and some sort of another man, I guess. But it's a bit hard to decipher because it's very grubby. Unlike the WI Inspiring Woman sign of 2019, which is nice and clear. So we could rename Rotherfield the WI Inspiring Women Village instead. Perhaps it needs a good clean. Eventually they arrived at St Dennis Church in the metropolis of Rotherfield. Eventually, young Richard's parents, James and Kitty, produced around about 10 children, as far as I can make out. They must have been very fit to keep marching up and down this Rotherfield hill, because personally it wears me out. My advice to Richard and his family would have been move closer to the church. The village of Rotherfield is very old. It is said that the original religious settlement was French in origin, the church being named St Denis, French, apparently, whoever he was. However, none of the locals seem to talk French anymore, so I can only assume that that part of them has been bred out, possibly when we left the EU and become an island again. Rotherfield was once a very busy cattle market. Now it's just busy. And a much larger than Crowborough, but that's another story. However, they would have still recognised some of the village and its beautiful church. But as they stood in the road admiring the church, they'd probably been run over. Taking my advice, at the age of 4, the young Richard and his family moved away from Coppard's Gate to a farm called Stone House. And that's what we're going to look into next. Where was Stone House or Stone House Farm? We're now standing in a much quieter area than the main high street of Rotherfield. Hardly any cars at all. But back in the day, when the young Richard Pratt was born, this was extremely busy. The old stone mill, just over in the background there, would have been working away with the stream of water going and pushing around its big water wheel. Not only was it important because of the mill, and that relates to the Pratt family, which we will talk about in depth later, but also because of the Stonehouse Farm. And at this point, there is one Stonehouse Farm up that way, and another Stonehouse Farm up this way, according to the map. So we've come to the Erridge Forestall, and this is the old Erridge Forestall School. I think on the date on the door is, what is it, Kev?
1876.
1876. So this school definitely would not have been built when young Richard was a boy. He was educated, or at least went to school for a few days during 1 year at a dame school on the Erridge Forestall. So it must have been somewhere along this road. Now, going back to talk about the old Stonehouse Farm or Stonehouse building where he was living at the time with his parents, this is the bit which is not known, whether it was the stone houses at Rotherfield or it was Stonehouse at Ors Nash. Now, Ors Nash is somewhere over that direction there, looking towards, in actual fact, looking towards Pilmerec direction at Crowborough. And Ors Nash is right down in there in that valley beyond Erridge. Now, if the young Pratt family lived down in that area, that would make sense that he would walk up through these fields to the forestall, to the dame school.
According to Wikipedia, dame schools were small, privately run schools for children between the ages of 2 and 5. These schools were taught by a school dame, a local woman who would care for the children and teach them the alphabet for a small fee. So basically somewhere you could dump your kids for a few hours with an untrained woman for a few pence. Now let's look into the options of where the Stonehouse or Stonehouse farms may have been. In his book, he doesn't actually state where they are and doesn't really give us much of a clue. Now, if it was the Stonehouse farm in Rotherfield Castle Hill area, this would actually make a lot of sense. He doesn't mention in the book, but Stone Mill was actually owned and run by his grandmother Kitty Ashby. So it would have been just a short walk around the corner to go and see his nan or his gran. I have also reason to believe that Kitty was reasonably educated, and she could have spent time with the young Richard and given a good basic education. We can see from this census that there is a stone house listed next door to Little Luxford Farm. Little Luxford Farm, we do know, was more or less where the garage is. The petrol station is just below Crowborough Cross on the Erridge Road. So one can assume that Stonehouse must have been very close. So this is why we're saying it could be the one at the end of Pilmer Road. Or indeed there could be another Stonehouse that we don't know of yet, and maybe someone out there can tell us. The young Richard was a bit of a Herbert, a little monkey as my mum would say. At the age of 5 he was out in the fields playing. His dad was busy loading up the horse and cart with mud and leaves from the ditches. I'm going to ride on that cart for some fun, thought Richard. His dad firmly told him not to. That cart is for muck, boy, not riding on. But when his dad wasn't looking, he snuck up behind the cart, climbing up onto the big spoked wheels. Next thing, the horse moved, the cart jolted forward, the wheel went over the small boy's hand, crushing his fingers on his right hand.
Interestingly, Crowborough Hospital may just have existed during the young Richard's time, but not as we know it. It was known as Slab Castle, and it was made from big lumps of wood and run by the parish of Rotherfield. It was sort of a retirement home for the poor. It wasn't a poorhouse, but sort of a retirement place, as I say, for the poor. Anyway, having no NHS, Richard probably had to put up with the pain because he had no choice.
When the young Richard was about 6 or 7 years old, he was very scared of lightning and thunder. Not surprising, you might think. Young Richard was outside peeling potatoes for his mother, when he suddenly had the realisation that Jesus was standing by the side of him. Woke up in complete and utter terror, absolute amazement, only to realise that he'd fallen asleep. Potatoes not quite finished. Personally, I would have gone to Morrison's and bought a bag. Much easier. In fact, Richard became so keen to learn all he could about religion, and he studied it in great depth, even becoming a teacher at the local Sunday school. And no, he didn't attend this school either. It wasn't built till 1894. He became immersed in the Anglican religion, believing this was the only religion for him. And let's face it, they were very poor. He didn't have a TV or a games console to play with in the evenings, and even if he had one, electric hadn't been around anyway. So what's the difference between Church of England and Anglican? Well, according to the internet, the Church of England is also known as the Anglican Church, and it was founded by King Henry VIII in the early 16th century. He founded the church so that he could divorce his wife, Queen Catherine of Aragon, and marry Anne Boleyn, with the hope of producing a male heir. Handy that. Religion was on his mind all the time. The fear of being damned to hell, fire and brimstone. Not doing right by God consistently played on his conscience. To be honest, his book does rant on a bit.
During his youth, according to his book, he gets his first job, what was called going into service. Basically, a zero contract job on basic wages, today's equivalent to working in Burger King or Domino's, McDonald's or Buckingham Palace, which employs 350 zero contract seasonal workers during the summer.
Mr. Hickley, who was running the mill at the top of Mill Lane at the time, he was a miller's joinery man. This meant he had basically done his apprenticeship in milling and had passed his qualifications. So the young Richard was in good hands to pick up some new skills. Unfortunately, it seems that his jobs were feeding the pigs and horses and the other animals and all the boring stuff that youngsters don't really like doing. He found himself nodding off to sleep, only to wake up in the middle of a dream, run onto the green, convinced that fire was coming down from heaven, burning up the earth. It seems that he is emotionally pulled in two directions. It says on page 13 of his book, he attends church regularly and tries very hard to keep out of trouble. But then he would go out with his mates and get into trouble again. He would use bad language and do bad things. He uses the term under bondage of the law. I think this means that he feels compelled to follow his religious beliefs, or the laws as he calls them. That is, to be good and behave. It would seem that at times the old Red Cross pub could be quite rowdy. Who would have thought that?